Good morning, good afternoon, you guys. Thanks for coming to McKenna's webinar, Photoshop Made Easy. Now, we're going to first get into some color profiles from camera, then we're talking about our workspaces, and then our tools and menus, and then our layers, and then saving the files for web. So all that aside, now let's get into Photoshop. But what I want to first speak about is color profile. Now, when we're shooting digital, color profiles matter because and basically if you don't change the color profile from where you start to where you finish, you won't have any shift. Okay, so at the beginning of every shoot, I format my card. I go into my menu. This is a Canon 5DS. I go into my menu. I format my compact flash card if I'm shooting on a card. Now, if I'm shooting tethered using Capture One, then that's a different story. But if I'm shooting cards, I am formatting that card. After that, and I don't do this for every shoot because I'm the only user of my camera these days, so I know that I didn't change anything. I know I'm shooting in RAW, and I can zoom in here. I'm shooting in RAW, and I just created this in Photoshop, so these are just layers. Okay, and it's just easy and I can hide these guides. Okay, if I want to take it a step further, this is my RAW. I'm not shooting any JPEGs. You can't shoot RAW and JPEGs. I'm just shooting RAW. And then let's go down here. My color space is RGB. Now, color profile and color space are the same exact thing. Okay, so this is how Canon phrases it, color space sRGB. We at McKenna, we print in sRGB. And if you have your Photoshop set up as sRGB, managing your files and that kind of thing in Lightroom as well, if you're exporting from Lightroom, just double check that color profile in there. So color space, sRGB, and then once again, you have these two options, at least I do in my camera. I sometimes shoot in 98, quite frankly, but if I'm sending it to McKenna or to another lab, I will either ask that lab or I can tell you from our end here at McKenna, we ask you to put all your files into sRGB. So if you're shooting and setting your color space as sRGB, you should be fine. Okay, now taking that a step further, I'm in Photoshop now. When in Photoshop, if you haven't become familiar, make sure you get familiar with these preferences. Now you have, here's just a general, so side note, offshoot of, we'll get back to color settings, but this other preference menu is important for you, and I'll just open this up here. This is important for you guys to see all of these options to change in here. So if you're not familiar with it, get familiar with it. I recommend that. If you have any issues with that, you guys can always set up coaching sessions with me one-on-one. Feel free to sign up anytime. But for right now, we are talking about color settings. So this is another menu in here. This is how I have mine saved up. So this is how Photoshop will default to. These are my working spaces. If I want this to default to sRGB, this is where I would set this up. So again, and I'll just escape out of there because I'm already set up. That's in the edit menu, and then color settings, shortcut, Shift, Control K. I'm on a PC. If you're on a Mac, it's Command and Shift K. Now, this specific photo, I specifically changed to Pro Photo RGB. Now, source space is what the color profile is in. Say you got this image from your assistant's camera, you were shooting this wedding, and he or she is shooting in a different color space than what you shoot in. And when you bring this into Photoshop, the very first step that I do before creating all these layers over here in my layers panel, before anything, I will come in and check my color profile. Very important step, because if you don't do that, what ends up happening is your layers will be flattened. Okay, so this is my destination space. Again, you can set this anyone. These are all my profiles. You can set this at any one you want. But if you set up your color space, your color profile, your color settings in Photoshop, like we just were in the previous panel, this will default until you change it to profile sRGB. And quite frankly, just side note, it will be the last one you set. But just so you know, the destination space, your default space is sRGB. So this is what you want to be in. If you do work with us, we do recommend that you do the conversions so that you don't have any unexpected color shifts. We can convert to your profile, but we can't guarantee that there's not going to be a shift. Now, color profiles are, it's an in-depth conversation about what colors are in gamut in ProPhoto and in 98 as opposed to sRGB and in CMYK. And if you have some fluorescent colors, maybe when converting into sRGB, the sRGB color space is a smaller color space, and therefore some of those colors might become flattened, might be dull. And so we ask that you do the conversion and you see that on your end and you send us the files sRGB. So that is definitely recommended. So before creating any layers, this is what I would do. Okay, now I'm working, if I went back to that same thing, convert to profile, now I'm in sRGB. Now I know I'm good. Okay. Now, just hypothetically, I'm going to back up into my history and just to see that here's my window, here is my history. Okay, that was what I did, and this is what I'm just, as if I opened it up. Let's just imagine for a second that I'm still in ProPhoto and I didn't check my color profile and I added, you know, some curves and I added some other layers and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'm done. Now I need to send it to print. I'm going to go to convert to profile and watch what happens over here on the right-hand side is all of my layers disappeared. Why? Because it flattened. So I lost my layers. Okay, so always make sure you convert before and then start working and adding your layers because Photoshop is different than Lightroom in the sense that Lightroom has cache memory that's saved within the program of all of your history states, whether you worked on it one day and then 2 years ago. If you're still in Lightroom using that, you're still going to have your history states. Whereas in Photoshop, you can keep all of your layers, but as soon as you close that specific file, you're not going to have your history anymore. The next time you open it up, history is going to be blank. Next thing I want to talk about, we're going to get to this image here, okay? Now, I'd like to speak about our tools, which are over here, our rulers, which is Control R, hiding rulers, you just do Control R again. If you're on a Mac, Command R, hide rulers, show rulers. Now, setting up your workspace, I always set it up so that my rulers are on. And what I'm saying is if you start adding things like in this corner, and then you turn your rulers on and then save this workspace, your tools are going to be covering your rulers. So what I do is turn my rulers on. Again, it's Control R if you're on a PC. And I put this right in that corner. Now, Workspaces is basically your layout of all your tools and everything that you see and everything that you have around. This is something that I'm going to set up in a way that is conducive to how I work. I don't really need channels, so I'm going to close that group. I'm just going to close this whole entire thing, actually, quite frankly. Close tab group. Anytime you have any three lines or these little arrows, you can click on them and close them. Okay. And just a side note while I bring up here, well, I'll tell you the side note as I'm grabbing these things. Okay, so you have all your menus up here. Here's your Windows. Now your Windows has all of the information that you want to see. Okay, at some point, it's good to set these things up. I recommend setting up as soon as you can, just so you're able to see things, because if some of you guys have worked in Lightroom, you're like, oh, it's much easier. There's a bunch of sliders and you can see everything. In Photoshop, it's like, I don't even know where to go. It's kind of like Premiere. Premiere is just a video editing program, and it can get really complicated. But if you set up your workspace, and I have these saved workspaces, and we're going to save one. then it's much easier to find things. I like my Navigator too. And yeah, maybe a histogram. You don't, let's not do a histogram. You don't really need it unless you want it. So all of these things can be added. Okay, we got paragraph, these are pretty much the things that I use, let's say, and then history is there. Okay, so now this is how if I'm on one screen, this is how I would set it up. I'm going to keep my layers as close to my image as possible. Say it's a horizontal image, it's going to be around here sometime. And you can hover over the edges of each panel and you'll get these little arrows, okay? And these arrows in the corner as well, just like any document that you're familiar with. Okay, so layers is going to be the longest probably because I usually end up having a lot of them. And then next to this, I'm going to click and drag and hold. And okay, now you can see my mouse where the cursor is, and I get a blue line. If I let go, now these two are combined. If I grab the tab up top, okay? And if I grab this tab again, I can separate it, okay? So either way, I'm going to just start building this the way I usually work if I'm on one screen. Now, if I'm on two screens, which I am, but you're only seeing one. If I was on two screens, all these tools I keep on my left screen, and my main screen is devoid of all tools except for this tool over here. This one I keep on this screen, and all of these I keep on my left screen, my alternate monitor. Okay, so now I can just set this up any way I'd like. I want let's say my info there. Let's actually put our history in here. Let's put our Navigator under it. Maybe we can just consolidate these to 3. And then let's put this in here. Okay, so now I have all of these, and I could put this off to this corner here, let's say, right? Say I want it exactly there. Okay, perfect. Oh, I forgot my characters. Tell you what, let's put paths in with layers. Let me just show that to you again. Now I dragged and held, and this becomes a tab if the whole entire layers panel gets selected. Now it can drop there, it can drop here, it can drop wherever. It's just going to become another tab. If I want to see layers, it's here. I use paths a lot, but I don't need to see it unless I really want to see it. So I'm not going to have it occupy space if I only have one screen. Okay. So all this stuff is important, and we'll go through the reason why. So I'm going to save everything I just did by going to Window, Workspace, New Workspace. I'm going to set this up as, I'm just going to put my initials. First, I'm going to put a date. I always put the year and the month and then the day, put a space. These things, if I had created some shortcuts from the last time I saved my workspace, I might want to select this and some other things. If I change some of these menus or whatever and customize them, I'll want to keep those selected so that when I do save my workspace, it'll load everything that I created. Okay. So you have some default workspaces. Now that's saved and it's selected here. This is the one I'm on. Okay, these are other default workspaces. It seemingly didn't do anything. Why? Because I was in photography and then I built my 313 workspace. Now, if I want to be in photography, but it's not changing, all I have to do is hit reset photography. And it goes back to what you saw in the beginning of this webinar, which is exactly that. Okay, now again, if I went in here, now this is what I saved, and I'm like, I don't like layers over there, and I don't need all of this, and I want this to be here and that kind of thing, and I want this over here. Now I can either two ways. I can create a new workspace and give it a different name. And by giving it a different name, it's going to add another one up here. But if I gave it that same exact name as this 24-3-13 space EGM, it identically named, and then hit new, it's going to say, do you want to overwrite? Do you want to, save as and replace the other one? And if you say yes, it will. Okay, so if you don't want a bunch of these, that's how you do it. Okay. And then again, going back to the way we set it up in the beginning, here's reset, and we're back to square one. Okay, that's how to set up your workspace. That's how to save your workspace. And this works in Adobe Bridge. This works in Premiere, and it also works in Lightroom. You can save your workspaces. Each program's going to be a little different, but in terms of workspaces and what those are, that's a good thing to do. All right, let's get into some tools now. Okay, I have this image. I did a bunch of work on it just to show we're going to get into, and I kind of changed a bunch of things here. All right, now we're going to get into what all these things are and how to do this. Okay, so if you can see on my left-hand side, you have a row, and you can set this up so there's two rows. It's just over here, two rows or one or column, sorry, one column or two columns. Now, in Photoshop, just like other programs you might know, the cool thing about keyboards and shortcuts is that each of these tools corresponds to a letter. Now, if I just hover over this top tool, it says it's the move tool, and you can see right here it says V. Now, move tool is key if you want to move something. Okay, so if I'm on this layer and it's unlocked, I can literally just come in here and move this around. Okay, and again, I can either go into my history panel over here on the right hand side and go up one history state and go back to where it was, or I could literally do Command Z or Control Z, sorry, for PC or Mac. And then if you hold Shift Control Z, it actually replaces it, right? Control Z undo, and this is redo. Okay, so that is the move tool, and that's a little bit about using your history state. Now, the next tool here, if you hover over, I have an M key. This is Marquee tool. Okay, so the Marquee tool can create a box. This is going to create a sun anytime, and I'm just hovering over. Photoshop is doing this on its own. Okay, now again, so if I want to be in that tool, I can just hit the M key and it changes, right? If I want to go back to the V key, I don't have to go up here. I can literally be over here and hit V, and it turns into the V key, right? And then, but I want the M key, but say I don't want a circle, I want a square. So I just changed that without even going over here. How did I do that? I held Shift and then clicked M. I'm just holding Shift, clicking M, and the Marquee tool changes from a circle to a square. Now, I can create a circle like this. I can do Shift M and hold the Shift key and actually add to my selection. Or I can hold the Alt key, which is Option on a Mac, and I can subtract from the selection. If I want to subtract the entire thing, go around all the marching ants and they disappear, right? Because if I didn't hold Shift and I have a box, now I want to say I want, her face in there too, but I forgot to hold Shift, well, it's just going to create a new one. Now you can hit undo, there's your box, hold Shift, and create two boxes. If you want to deselect, you can either go up here to this and you see Control D and do that, and that'll deselect this. If you're like, no, I didn't want that, again, Control Z or go to your history state and do that. Now, if you want to path or trace her, let's say, I just hit the L key, and the L key is the lasso. Now I'm just going to come around here. I'm using a Wacom pen, so it's easier, a little easier to draw. Okay. Now, and say, oh, you kind of messed up here. We'll tell you what, add to selection or subtract from selection is here. I'm going to add holding shift in here. Okay. Now I can come over here, this button, into the layers panel and create a mask of that area. Okay. And these little buttons are key. Okay, we'll get into that a little deeper. Say if I have another background, I could put that on, but I could literally invert this if I want. And that's just Control I. Now we can get into all this stuff. I'm not gonna go deep into that right now. Okay. Holding shift, I can put an X on the mask itself and get rid of that. Okay. Now I'm just going to come back here and get back to our tools. All right. But anyway, that's what you would do with a selection is you can work with this button here, which is create a layer mask onto that layer. Okay. So lasso tools, marquee tools. Here's the M again. I can add to selection. I could create boxes, circles, lassos. I can also use the W key. This is a quick selection tool. Now within each tool, you have all these different options. So magic wand is a certain thing that will select like pixels going around, and based on the tolerance will select more or less of it. This is a cool tool though. I'm just going to deselect, Control D, and say I want Photoshop to find my subject. I just went up to the top and it says select subject. It's going to select the subject. And this will be talked about in another webinar, but I've already created a mask and I'm just holding deselect. I'm just holding on to, or I pushed the backslash key. I went over to this mask and hit the backslash key. I'll get into masks, but I already have my mask there. Okay, so quick selection tool is here. I'm just going through the tools right now, so I don't want to get too deep into anything. Okay, so that's the W key for wand, C for crop. Okay, cool thing about cropping is I can come in here and use different ratios. I can say I need a square. I want a 16:9. Okay, I can hit this button and it'll be vertical. Another cool thing, let's just I can just clear this. So there's no set ratio, right? But say that's my crop. I'm sure most of you guys know about the rule of thirds. So if you want to place her in a certain way based on the rule of thirds, maybe your crop changes a little bit and you're like, actually, this is a better crop based on the rule of thirds. And I just use that little button up here. When you click on it, it gives you different options. I selected rule of thirds. You can come here. These are triangles. These are this is the golden ratio. And you can Google all this stuff and see what these things are and why they matter. But for composition, this is a really cool feature, or just a straight up grid. So I like the rule of thirds, let's say, and I'm just going to put some guides on where I think a supposed crop will be. Now, you can't create any guides without rulers. At least I don't know how, and maybe you can. I just haven't figured that one out yet. But I am just grabbing some guides from the top. I can grab guides from over the rulers on the left. And if I hold the Alt key, those guides now turn 90 degrees. Okay, I got one from the top, so it's going to be horizontal. But say I want where my crop would be, I'm not going to crop it, but I'm going to simulate where that crop would be. And I can not hit enter into the crop. I can hit escape, get out of the crop. And then there's still my guides for my rule of thirds of when I actually do want to crop it. So say I did all of this work and now I'm ready to crop. Well, I already know my crop and I can come in here and just crop accordingly. And there's my crop. based on my rule of thirds. And I got there by going into the crop tool, having this up, this rule of thirds, and then creating some guides, which are here, and then basing my composition on those guides, but not cropping until the very end of all of my work. Okay, so I'm just going to back up here. Supposedly, like we didn't do any cropping. If I want to get rid of the guides, I can come up here and go to, so I went to view, I went to guides, and I can go to clear guides, and there's no guides. Or another way, if you have a guide, you can literally just drag up back into the ruler and the guides go away. Okay, so those are guides, those are rulers, that's the crop. I'll skip a couple of these because some tools I don't use. I call this the J tool. This is a healing brush, but for some reason, this is the letter J. So I just refer to this as the J tool, and that is for healing. And you can see pretty much what that does. You select an area and it's going to blend the area next to it, or where you picked from, and into the areas around it. Here's probably the most famous tool in here in terms of fixing photos. If it covers, clone stamp tool S. So I just think of it as a stamp tool, and this is my J tool, healing brush, J and S. Now, those two things are they're a little trickier, okay? In that when you are healing something, okay? Say, for instance, I want to get rid of a couple of these spots, okay? Now, the way I work in Photoshop is by layers, as you can see, and this very bottom layer is my original, okay? So I can literally double click on the name and type in original, okay? And like you see here, I already typed in adjustments, and I'm just going to do this again because, whoops, I didn't mean to do it twice, because I did it before. Adjustments. All right, so now that I have this layer here, I can use my clone stamp tool or my healing on this blank layer. And why I do it that way is important, because instead of duplicating, and I'm just going to Control J to duplicate that, or Command J on a Mac. Instead of using the clone tool like it defaults to, and it defaults to, I went up here to the top in the center, it says current and below, or it defaults to current layer, okay? And the healing, I just changed to the healing brush, and I have it set at current and below, but I want to show you that it defaults to current layer. Okay, so whenever you duplicate a layer, you're creating more megabytes for your computer to work. It's going to save at a slower pace. It's going to process at a slower pace. It's going to occupy more memory on your hard drive. It's just going to be larger, and unnecessarily larger. Let's put it that way. So why I don't work like this, and sure, you can come in here and pick an area and heal it, and there's the spots, they're gone. Okay, cool. But you can do the same exact thing by setting this as current and below. And let's just get rid of this. And by creating this blank layer, and I just did that from here in the layers panel, this little plus, you add a layer. Okay, so I just added this blank layer. Now, if I hold the Alt key, which is Option on a Mac, you see that there's absolutely not a single pixel on here. This is just totally blank. Okay. And if this was current layer, and I'm in my healing brush and I select an area over here and I go to paint, nothing's going to happen. Why? Because this needs to be set to current and below. And then I can avoid duplicating this layer and duplicating the amount of megabytes that my machine needs to fix this photo. Okay, It's a good thing to do. Try to lower your file size so that you can help your workflow. I'm all about efficiency. That's why I use shortcuts, and that's one reason why I do it this way. But Photoshop works in hierarchy. So this top layer will affect everything below it. Okay. So if you, just for those of you who are more on the beginner level, if I were to take my original, all of these adjustments didn't make any change to it at all. That's why the original and everything I want to change should be above this layer. Okay, it works in hierarchy. Whatever's above it is more dominant, unless you start changing the opacity. Okay, and we can get into opacities in another webinar, but basically you can change the effect of something. Like if this layer here, I can reduce this opacity to have it be affected more or less. Okay, but again, we're gonna talk about that at a later date. But that's just a little intro to that. So in using the healing brush, and also I have it set at current below, and also your stamp tool, I just hit the S key for stamp. Now current layer, again, if I went over to fix, this line, it doesn't do anything. But if I set it to current and below, it does, and there you go, right? So, and I'm not going to sit here and fix it all. I kind of went through and fixed some here. So we'll just use that one for now, because I think I fixed some things down. Yeah, I fixed some of these things right there. And so anyway, that is the healing brush, the clone, the hand. Now H for hand. Hand is basically moving the whole entire image around. But what I find is easiest is to be in whatever tool you're in. So say I'm in the Marquee tool and I'm, making a selection on her face, let's say. Now I can just hold the space bar and it turns into a hand. I don't have to actually, go over here, hit that. Now I get the hand. Then I have to go back to the M, so let's be efficient here. If I'm working on, different parts and kind of just making some selections, and if I want to move this around, just hold the space bar, turns into a hand. And how I did this is a cool little shortcut too. This is space bar and control for plus, space bar, control, alt, or command option space bar. You get a minus. Instead of using this zoom tool, you can hold the alt or option key and do this, but I would rather just be in, now I'm back to my M tool. I can be in my M tool and I can literally just come in here and zoom in, and that's literally holding my space bar and control. So I'm just trying to get through these tools right now so that these tools are going to be, you're familiar with it. Because, a lot of times we'd buy actions or presets from some place and then we load them into our system. And then it's like, what do I do with these actions? I don't know what to do with these actions. How do I work with these actions? This is overwhelming. I don't even know what to do. I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And that's, that's fine. But I would much rather have you guys be comfortable with all of your menus, all of your workspaces, and all of your tools. Okay, so one last thing before we move on to saving your files is these adjustments. And I call this basically the Holy Grail. This is like my favorite button so that I can do these adjustments. Okay, and that's how I created all these layers. This button right here is my favorite, right? Okay, so say I have this selection. I got that selection from the wand going up here. So if you want me to do that, I can. Here's select subject. It's going to select the subject. This is my selection. Now it's not going to be as perfect as this one, and you can see the difference right there. I just held Control and clicked on the mask and got my selection. Now this, honestly, I call the Holy Grail. this is super important, this button right here, because it allows you to create these adjustments where you can just turn them on and off at will so that you don't have to do anything damaging or destructive, and save it and not have to, you would be unable to get your work back, let's say, instead of just being so easy like turning off and on a layer. Now, once I have my selection, I'm just going to come up here to select the inverse, Shift Control I. And again, I recommend you guys learning all these shortcuts, because then you never have to waste time getting into menus. Say I want to make a curve of that. So it took my selection, made it black. And again, this is like dodge and burn old school photo techniques. So the black, and I just hit the backslash key. The backslash key basically shows you what the mask is. If I hold the Alt key, then the Alt key shows you what the mask is. It just doesn't have any translucency like the backslash key does. Okay. And again, if I hold the Control key, it'll give me the marching ants of the selection that I have. Okay, since I already have that selection, Control D or deselect, I can click on this button and I can change the curves and whatever I want. Say I want a little darker. That looks perfect. All right, great. Now, if I don't want that, say I don't want that, I can just turn that off and nothing's affected. Now, the other way of working, and I recommend you not working like this. I recommend you working like with these layer adjustments, and I recommend you not working like this, going up to image and then adjustments and doing curves. Yes, you get the same menu and you're like, oh, I like that curve. Okay, cool, great. But what happens if you change your mind? And I'm indecisive. Let's just state the facts. And I know that, so I own that. If I want to change tomorrow, in 5 years or whatever, when I get back into this Photoshop file, I want the option to change my curves. I don't want to have something be destructive and then have to be unable to make any changes. So working that way, going up here and doing all of these adjustments, exposure, say I want black and white, you're like, yeah, black and white, cool. Okay, but maybe in 5 years you want this color. Well, now you can't get it back if you worked that way. And this is just what I did with this image, is I changed the hue. You can see my properties when I went to hue saturation. This is hue saturation, and I'll get into this in the other webinar, but I basically just changed this hue to whatever I wanted to. Okay, I'll just put it back to the way it was. I think I added maybe a little selection. Oh, I changed her earring from gold to silver, right? So that's I changed it gold to silver. I did that through hue saturation. And again, working this way, coming down to this semicircle is so awesome, because you can literally change your mind from one day to the next and get it back to the original if that's how you like it. So these are just a few things I did on that photo just to see what can be done. This is a color fill. I'm not going to get into all this stuff. And then I threw a little vignette on that as well. So I definitely recommend spending a lot of time in the layers panel and working with this button, seeing what it does, turning things off and on. It's really cool. And that's, again, why I keep my workspace this way, and I keep my layers next to my image, because I don't want to go all the way to the right. I'm thinking how I want it set up, so I keep my layers next to my image. And couple things I didn't talk about over here. Now I can sit here scrolling and doing this, and I'm like, I want to get to the bottom right. So instead of getting to the bottom right, and if you look at my navigator on the right hand side, that little red square over here, I finally got to the bottom right. Well, I can use this and just get to the top left. I can use this and get to the bottom left, or use this and get to the bottom right, or I can check focus on her face, whatever I want. It's a cool way. So I always have my navigator up. That's why this is here. Actions we're not going to get into, but these are basically things that you can certainly set up that are to be more efficient if you do a lot of the same things, like create a curved layer, create a blank layer, create a hue saturation layer on every photo. You can basically set something up, push record, do all those things, and then hit stop. And then the next photo, you just hit play and it creates all those layers for you. I can teach you guys that in one-on-one sessions, talk about actions, but we'll certainly talk about that in other webinars, just not this one. But that's a good thing to mess around with. It's really awesome. It's going to save you time. The info is really cool too, because if we zoom in to her shirt, I can take the I, and this is my I over here on my tools. I just went to the letter I. Now I'm in this layer panel, or not layer panel, but info panel, and I can see my info. Now this is a very in-depth conversation of what do these numbers mean, RGB, CMYK, and all the numbers next to them. Now, I'm not going to get into that, but that is where I keep this info panel up, because it is important when we are retouching photos to see where the whites blow out, see where the shadow detail is lost, see what the skin density is. I can come to the forehead. I usually read the red channel. I'm at like 218, so it's exposed properly. I can check the teeth and see what the what that density is, you know, and so on and so forth. This character, I can come in here with my type tool. It's a T wherever my type is. There's my T. You can literally just create, here it is. So I can write whatever I want. If I get out of there, I can literally do a Command T or Control T. I can move this any way I want, as big as I want. I can come in and change this color, all kinds of things with the text tool. It's cool. So those are basically the tools for the main things that I use and how I use them. Those are the workspace setup, the color profile. One last thing. So resolution and dimensions, it's an inverse relationship, okay? Inches equals pixels divided by pixels per inch. Okay, so if I say my camera gave me an image when I put it into Photoshop, and I have my camera set up so it's 72 ppi, pixels per inch. So I think that I can print a 95 inch by 68 inch photo. And it's like, cool, awesome. Yeah, sure. I got lots of resolution. It's great. But tell you what, here at McKenna, we print at 300. So at 300, you could only do a 22 by 16. Okay. Now, nothing has changed because this resample is unchecked. Now, nothing has changed in terms of I haven't upsized or resed up, we call it, those pixels. Now, say you're at well, let's just say you're at 300, but now you want like a 45-inch print, right? So you want a 45-inch print. Well, how is this going to print? You know, it's not recommended, right? So you doubled the pixels, basically, and that means that unless you're exposed properly, low ISO, so low noise, it's nice and sharp. You shot it with a good camera, a good lens, all that kind of thing. Resing up things is tricky. Okay, so when you res things up, you really want to look at the pixels in depth, because it's not recommended. Okay, but that's how you do it. When this is checked, you can literally come in here and change some pixels, and it will be reflected in the image size up here. It was 97 megabytes. This M is for megabytes. It's now 375. So if you hit OK, it's going to res it up. Now there are different softwares that can res things up, or you can literally do it in Photoshop. Photoshop does an amazing job, quite frankly, but be careful in resing things up. Now, say I'm just going to flatten this whole thing. Okay, I'm go to these little 3 lines. You know, and one thing, and I think I didn't mention, but I remember when my 2-year-old got a hold of my iPad, he pressed every single button and deleted all my apps. Now, I really feel that pressing every button in Photoshop is a good thing, but do it on an image that you don't care about, but really remember what you did and how you got there and what you're doing, because you're really going to learn those buttons. And what I just did right there to flatten it, I went to these 3 buttons. Now you probably would never even think about, oh, I want to go to those 3 buttons, but that's where I go to flatten image. It's just much easier to flatten and lock that. Let's say we wanted that text, which we don't, but I'll tell you what, I'm just going to take it off. I don't want to see the text. You probably don't either. Okay. Say that's our image. Now, first we went to our image size was here, and I just did the shortcut Alt Control I. Now we want to do canvas size, Alt Control C. Okay. Now here's the thing. Okay. Before we do that, I'm just going to put a little guide right here on the end. Okay. Now I'm going to go to canvas size. Now the difference between canvas size and image size is this. Okay. Say I want a special cut, and I want the image to be, say 22 inches, but the product that I'm ordering is a 24 inch. Right? I don't really, let's not worry about the 14 for right now, but that extra piece is what I want for the special cut. Now, here's the thing. How did I just do that? I went to image, I went to canvas size. I clicked on this button because this arrow, I'm going to change the width, and this arrow means that it's going to extend to the right because I changed the width, and this arrow is pointing to the right. I want to add some extra space to the right. That's how you do it. Okay, but I want this white. Okay, so I'm going to take my Marquee tool. I drew a guide before that because it's going to snap to it. I have my foreground color like this, and I can right click and go to fill, and I can fill with foreground color, which is white. And there is my white, and then that's what I would send in. And if I want to crop that to now maybe a 16 by, let's do 16 by 24. This is the image, but I want to crop from the, let's say here, I'm going to crop up from the bottom. It's going to say, are you sure? And I say, yes. Okay. So there's my crop. And that's what I would send in if I want a special cut. Okay. Now, because it's going to be cropped, like, whoops, because it's going to be cropped here once you send it to us, but for ordering sake, you want all top and bottom, and you don't want it to fill to the screen, which it will do in the ordering software. So just prepare it like this, and that's how to do a special cut. So, all right, now if you're saving this, I'm just going to go just one last thing. I'm going to set this to 72 inches. Now it's going to change. That's fine. Now I'm going to save this for the web. Let's just crop this so we don't have to look at our white. That's my crop, let's say. Okay, I'm going to now come in here to export, and I'm going to come in save for web, legacy, Alt Shift Control S. All right, now the beauty of this is that I can change my file size based on the compression that I want for the web. Now, one last thing before I just X'd out of there. I am just going to check this. Okay, so 16. I want my, sorry, I'm just going to do a couple of things, and I'm jumping around here. I'm going to set my crop to be that. I'm going to set my image size to be 72. I'm going to come in here with pixels, and I want my height to be 1600. Actually, let's make it 2500 for maybe a 27-inch screen, and this is for my website. Okay, so then what's it? Control Shift Alt S. If I get out of my Marquee. Now this is safe for web where I was before. All right. Now I see that this is the original. It says it's 12 megabytes, and this is the compressed version. It's 1.8 megabytes. Now I have the ability to change this and to compress this. Now, depending if there's any banding or how it's breaking up, I will change accordingly. But also for the web or for Instagram or for Facebook, I probably want this around maybe 500 kilobytes. So I set it at quantity 50. As long as there's no banding or breaking up, then and everything looks good, then you just hit save and you're good to go. And that's in the color profile, which is sRGB. Okay. You can embed this and you can convert, but you already know you're in sRGB. It really doesn't matter. There's no color shift from the original to this. So you should be good to go. And that is how to save for web and a little bit about dimensions and resolution. Thank you guys for joining. And again, anytime you guys want to go deeper on a one-on-one level, please feel free to sign up with the coaching, and we will see you guys then.